You won't believe the one small detail that turned this sweet 71-year-old grandmother into a ruthless vigilante. It cost her son $33,400, but it will cost him much more than money. When I picked up the phone to call my son, Brandon, and ask him about his wedding date, his wife, Tiffany, looked me dead in the eye, that chilling, fake sincere smile plastered across her perfect face, and purred, "Oh, we had the wedding yesterday, Brenda. We only invited special people." The words struck my 71-year-old heart like a 1,000-pound hammer, shattering the illusion of family connection I had so desperately clung to. Special people. For 3 long years, I had been the silent, dutiful provider, covering their $500 monthly rent, buying every single piece of furniture that made their apartment a home, and meticulously stocking their refrigerator when their credit cards failed. I, Brenda Richter, was apparently not special. I stood frozen in the very living room I had paid for the Persian rug, the plush velvet sofa, the 60-inch smart TV, holding my phone as if it were a molten cinder, watching my only son, Brandon, studiously avoid my gaze while Tiffany, his beautiful, venomous bride, settled comfortably onto the cushions I had selected. This one conversation, this single moment of naked cruelty, was the spark that ignited a firestorm of calculated revenge I didn't even know I was capable of. The pale lavender gown I had carefully chosen for the wedding, a ridiculous, hopeful $200 purchase, now hung uselessly in my cedar closet, a painful monument to my delusion. Next to the shimmering silver shoes and the utterly shattered dream of standing proudly in my son's wedding photos I would never feature in. You won't believe the lengths I went to just to be included. For weeks, I had meticulously orchestrated every single detail surrounding the phantom event. I had skimped and saved from my meager retirement funds to prepare a $1,000 wedding gift, a sum that represented months of sacrifice. I had called my sister, Marilyn, in Chicago, bubbling over with the good news that turned out to be a cruel joke. I had scrubbed my modest suburban house from top to bottom, imagining them dropping by for an impromptu, post-ceremony celebration. All that hopeful planning, all that emotional investment, collapsed into a pile of ashes thanks to those 4 poisoned words, "only special people." But the real shocker? I helped pay for the dress she wore to exclude me. Brandon finally lifted his eyes, the look in them a practiced mixture of guilt and annoyance, and offered his pre-rehearsed, empty excuse. "Mom, it was just a tiny, intimate thing. Honestly, only the 2 of us and the witnesses." But I was no fool. I had already seen the evidence plastered all over social media, a sickeningly cheerful, public display of my exclusion. I saw Tiffany's parents beaming, posing proudly right next to the newlyweds. I saw her entire extended family, sisters and cousins, clinking champagne flutes in a grand toast. And worst of all, I saw Tiffany's white gown, the very garment I had inadvertently helped finance with the $800 I'd transferred to her for personal expenses just last month. I saw every agonizing detail I wasn't supposed to witness. The check I wrote her for emergencies was actually a down payment on my humiliation. Exactly 7 days after that brutal public shaming, the phone rang, and Tiffany's voice on the other end was a completely different instrument. Gone was the confident, condescending woman who had banished me from her wedding. Now she was desperate, trembling, barely keeping her carefully polished desperation in check. "Brenda," she whined, her voice barely a whisper, "the rent is 2 weeks past due. The landlord is pressuring us and says if we don't transfer the funds this week, he will evict us. You totally forgot to make the automatic transfer." Her voice cracked slightly, as if the entire world were teetering on the edge of financial collapse. I remained silent for what felt like an eternity, the memory of all those frantic, humiliating trips to the bank flooding my mind. All the times I had canceled my own medical appointments or social plans just to ensure they had a roof over their heads. All the lonely nights I had eaten cheap beans and rice so I could funnel my savings to fund their endless desires. And now, after throwing my unconditional love back in my face, they had the unmitigated gall to call me as if nothing had happened, expecting the endless flow of cash to continue. "Tiffany," I finally said, the unexpected calm in my own voice surprising me. "Didn't I warn you that I only help special people?" The silence on the line that followed was so profound, so thick with shock, that I could hear the loud, steady thump-thump of my own heart, a heart that, for the first time in years, was beating with certainty, not anxiety. It was not me who was trembling now, it was her. "Brenda," she stammered, clearly bewildered, "I don't understand. We were always special to you. You're like a second mother to me." Lies. A poisonous cascade of carefully constructed lies, all packaged in that sweet, sickly voice she only used when she needed a large financial favor. It was the same manipulative tone she had employed to ask me for money for the wedding dress fund, the honeymoon savings, and the ring upgrade, all of which I had helped finance, blissfully unaware I would never be present to see them exchange the very symbols I had paid for. You won't believe how much she got away with by just calling me Mom. For so many soul-crushing years, I had navigated my relationship with Brandon and Tiffany like a timid dancer on eggshells, meticulously weighing every single word, every gesture, every financial gift, all in the desperate hope of earning a single crumb of genuine affection from my own son. I had perfected the role of the ideal mother, the obliging, non-judgmental mother-in-law, the silent, bottomless ATM who never dared to protest when they treated me as though I were invisible. But that single, brutal phrase, only special people, had finally awakened a cold, calculating force within me that had been dormant for far too long. I ran a mental ledger, totaling the staggering amount of money I had poured into their lives over those 3 miserable years. Between the mandatory rent payments, the endless stream of groceries, lavish gifts, manufactured emergencies, and frivolous whims, the grand total exceeded a whopping $20,000. This amount was the key to my whole plan. That $20,000 wasn't spare change. It was money ripped directly from my carefully managed retirement fund, from the savings I had diligently accumulated, from the modest inheritance my late, beloved husband, Robert, had left so I could finally live my last years in peace. And what was the return on this massive investment of love and money? To be treated like an embarrassing stranger on the most significant day of my only son's life. That very night, after I calmly hung up the phone, I sat on my bed and I cried. But these were not the hot, familiar tears of profound sadness. They were the cold, necessary tears of white-hot anger, of years of silently accumulated frustration, of every humiliation I had silently endured. I cried for all the times they had successfully made me feel that my selfless love was a heavy burden, my presence an annoying hindrance, and my money the only thing I had left to offer. I cried for the foolish, blindly devoted mother I had been, for the woman who had utterly lost herself trying to be absolutely indispensable to people who clearly considered her completely dispensable. But the tears dried quickly, and that's when the planning began. When I woke up the next morning, something deep inside me had fundamentally shifted. It wasn't just the dull, throbbing ache of betrayal. It was something colder, more crystalline, and terrifyingly determined. I stood up and faced my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The same familiar, tired eyes looked back, framed by the same wrinkles that told the silent, painful story of years spent giving love without receiving it in return. But there was a new, frightening element in my gaze, a steel-like hardness I didn't recognize, a focused determination that had been violently unearthed from under years of passive compliance. I went straight to the kitchen and brewed my coffee, a morning ritual I had performed religiously for 40 years. But this time, I didn't feel the familiar, anxious impulse to call Brandon to ask about his day. I didn't obsessively check my phone, anxiously anticipating a message from him apologizing for the previous day's blatant humiliation. For the very first time in a very long time, my own well-being was the single, most important concern of my day. I sat down at the sturdy kitchen table where I had so often meticulously planned lavish surprises for them, carefully counted cash for their endless expenses, and silently cried when they had treated me with unforgivable indifference. Now, this table would bear witness to a completely different kind of calculation. I pulled out my checkbook, my bank statements, and a calculator, determined to quantify the exact, staggering extent of my own colossal foolishness. The arithmetic was sobering and precise. The $500 monthly rent multiplied by 36 months equaled $18,000. Food and household supplies, averaging a conservative $200 a month, added another $7,200. Birthday, Christmas, and anniversary gifts totaled at least $3,000. Tiffany's assorted, fabricated medical emergencies cost $800. The car loan they never once attempted to repay me for stood at $2,500. The emergency air conditioning repair in their apartment was $600. The entire living room furniture ensemble I paid for came to $1,200. The total? $33,400. That was the sickeningly exact sum of my blind, reckless generosity. $33,400 I had siphoned from my late husband's inheritance, from my small pension, from the savings I had painstakingly accumulated, penny by penny, over decades of honest, hard work. All that money, literally tossed out the window, just to keep two manipulative adults comfortable, two adults who couldn't even manage the basic decency of pretending to respect me. The phone rang, and I watched Brandon's name flash across the screen. Normally, my heart would have immediately pounded, and I would have sprinted to answer, hoping that finally, he would apologize and explain everything away as a misunderstanding. But this time, I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Eventually, it fell silent, and I calmly continued to sip my coffee, utterly unperturbed. 10 minutes later, it rang again. This time, it was Tiffany. I let it ring too. Then, a desperate text message arrived from Brandon. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk. It's urgent." I deleted the message instantly, without a single reply. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I decided to go for a long walk. I hadn't taken a walk in months without a specific, urgent purpose, an errand that always revolved around them. It was always a frantic trip to the bank for an emergency transfer, the supermarket to buy them something they urgently needed, or the pharmacy for Tiffany's latest fictional medication. Today, I went for a walk just because I wanted to. This small act of selfishness was the first step in my terrifying plan. I walked past the local park where I had so often pushed Brandon on the swing set as a small child. I vividly remembered that sweet, innocent boy who used to wrap his arms tightly around my neck and declare that I was the best mom in the whole world. When had he subtly morphed into this demanding, self-entitled man who now saw me as nothing more than an ATM machine with a lingering pulse? When did I confuse genuine love with a constant stream of money? When did I start believing that I had to actively purchase my own son's affection? I arrived at the bank, the very branch where I had processed countless automatic transfers, and stopped directly outside the entrance. The branch manager, a kind man named Mr. Klein, saw me through the plate glass window and offered a friendly wave. I had known Mr. Klein for years. He had personally overseen every single transfer I had sent to Brandon and Tiffany. He had silently watched my account steadily bleed dry, month after month, to artificially inflate theirs. I walked inside and went straight to his office. "Mr. Klein," I informed him, my voice firm and businesslike, "I need you to immediately cancel all the automatic transfers I have programmed to my son and his wife." He looked at me with genuine surprise. For 3 years, those transfers had been as reliably regular as the sunrise. "Are you absolutely sure, Mrs. Richter? Did something happen?" His concern was genuine, far more authentic than any interest Brandon had shown in my life in recent memory. "What happened," I replied simply, "is that I finally opened my eyes." I continued, "I want to cancel absolutely everything, and I also need detailed information on how to fully protect my accounts. I want to ensure no one else has access to my money ever again." As Mr. Klein efficiently processed the urgent cancellations, my phone began to ring relentlessly. Brandon, Tiffany, then Brandon again. It was as if they had developed some kind of internal financial radar, immediately detecting when their source of easy income was in immediate danger. I turned the phone completely off. "Mrs. Richter," Mr. Klein said, handing me the signed papers, "I apologize for intruding, but in all these years, I have watched you be extraordinarily generous with your family. I truly hope you are not being pressured into making these drastic changes. His words touched me deeply. This man, who knew me only through my bank transactions, displayed more genuine concern for my well-being than my own flesh and blood. "I am not being pressured, Mr. Klein," I replied, allowing a small, meaningful smile to curve my lips. "On the contrary, I have finally stopped pressuring myself." As I left the bank, I felt an extraordinary lightness, as if I had shed an enormous, decades-long burden in that quiet office. For the first time in years, my money was entirely, unequivocally mine. I no longer had any crushing financial obligations to people who viewed me merely as a disposable resource rather than a cherished person. I drove home, my mind racing through all the things I had systematically not done to please Brandon and Tiffany. The exotic trips I had canceled to save money for them. The friends I had stopped seeing because I had to be perpetually available for their manufactured emergencies. The hobbies I had completely given up because every dollar spent on myself was one less dollar for their endless needs. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw 3 cars parked directly in front of my door. Brandon's SUV, Tiffany's sedan, and a third car I immediately did not recognize. My blood ran ice cold as I saw movement inside my house through the windows. They had keys. I had foolishly given them keys because I trusted them. Because I believed that one day, they would care for me just as I had tirelessly cared for them. I took a deep, steadying breath before unlocking the door. It was time for the first, terrifying confrontation of my new, self-directed life. I was about to deliver a shocking blow that would change everything. I wrenched open the front door of my house and was met by a scene I will carry with me forever. Brandon was slumped on my new sofa, his head buried deep in his hands. Tiffany was frantically pacing the room, moving like a panicked, caged animal. And an older man I didn't recognize was brazenly rifling through a stack of papers spread out on my dining table. My papers, my most private, personal documents. What in heaven's name is happening here? I demanded, my voice emerging louder and sharper than I expected. All 3 intruders whipped their heads around, staring at me as if I were the trespasser in my own home. Tiffany was the first to speak, her voice oozing the desperate, phony urgency I had already heard on the phone. "Brenda, thank goodness you're finally here. We urgently need to talk. Mr. Fisher is from the law firm we consulted about your situation." "My situation?" The question was delivered with an unnerving calm that genuinely surprised me. "What situation?" "I'm doing perfectly fine." Brandon finally lifted his head, those eyes that once held the innocence of a child now reflecting only raw, unadulterated financial panic. "Mom, we went to the bank, and they told us you canceled all the transfers. Mr. Klein explained you also blocked our access to your accounts. We honestly don't understand why you would do that." The unfamiliar man, Mr. Fisher, a sharp-looking man in his 50s wearing a gray power suit and a smile that inspired zero confidence, approached me, his hand outstretched. "Mrs. Richter, I am Dr. Fisher, a family law attorney. Your children are quite concerned about your mental well-being and have asked me to assess the situation." I completely ignored his outstretched hand. Instead, I walked purposefully to my dining table and swiftly gathered all my documents he had been reviewing without my express permission. "These are my private papers. You have absolutely no right to look at them without my consent." "Mom," Brandon interjected, using the condescending, patronizing tone he had perfected over the past few years. "We are worried about you. Your behavior has been quite strange lately. First, you financially cut us off without any explanation. Then you won't answer our calls. We honestly think you might need some professional help." Tiffany glided closer and attempted to take my hand with that artificial, sticky tenderness she reserved exclusively for moments when she desperately needed something. "Brenda, honey, we know you're under a lot of stress. Perhaps the loneliness is affecting you more than you think. At your age, episodes of confusion are quite normal." The word confusion echoed in my head, a jarring, terrifying alarm bell. I understood immediately now why they had brought the lawyer. It wasn't about helping me, it was about having me legally declared mentally incompetent and seizing control of my substantial finances. The same venomous woman who had told me I wasn't special enough for her wedding was now attempting to have me labeled a senile old lady. "I am not confused," I stated. the sheer force of my voice silencing them all instantly. I am clearer than I have been in years, and all three of you are going to leave my house right now. Mr. Fisher quickly stepped forward, employing that professional, measured voice that lawyers use when they want to sound calm and reasonable. Mrs. Richter, I understand you feel overwhelmed, but your children have a legal right to intervene if they genuinely believe your ability to make sound financial decisions is impaired. They have extensively documented several concerning behaviors. Concerning behaviors, I scoffed, a dry, almost cruel laugh escaping my throat. Like what? Like deciding that my own money belongs to me? Like choosing to no longer finance the lives of two perfectly capable adults who treat me like disposable trash? Tiffany recoiled instantly, as if I had physically slapped her. We never treated you badly. You are family. Everything you own will belong to us one day anyway. We are simply trying to speed up the process. There it was. The naked, brutal, unvarnished truth. Everything I had would one day be theirs. In their cold, calculated minds, I was already effectively dead, and they were simply trying to collect their substantial inheritance in advance. It didn't matter if I had 70 more years or 70 more days left to live. To them, I was just a problematic ATM that had suddenly become difficult to control. Out, I commanded, pointing an unforgiving finger toward the front door. All three of you. Get out of my house. Brandon jumped up, his face contorted in the angry, petulant scowl he had always worn when he didn't get his way. Mom, we can't just leave. We have substantial obligations. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you co-signed for. You can't just cut us off from one day to the next. I can't. My voice rose sharply for the first time in the entire confrontation. Who says I can't? For years, I paid rent for an apartment that wasn't even in my name. I filled a refrigerator in a house where I was not welcome. I financed an entire, comfortable life that clearly had no place for me, the provider. Mr. Fisher opened his briefcase and placed a legal folder neatly on my table. Mrs. Richter, we have prepared some documents that could facilitate this transition. A power of attorney that would allow Brandon and Tiffany to manage your finances more efficiently. This would, of course, be temporary until you feel better. I picked up the folder and, without even bothering to look inside, I threw it forcefully and satisfyingly into the kitchen trash can. The only transition that is going to happen here is yours to the front door. Tiffany began to weep, but these were not tears of genuine sadness. They were the frustrated, contained tears of pure rage. You can't do this to us, Brenda. We were counting on you. We made extensive plans based on your support. We bought things. We took on massive financial obligations because we knew we could always count on you. Obligations based on my money, I countered instantly, not on my well-being, not on my happiness, not on my companionship, just on my money. And now that I have decided that my money is better utilized in my own life, I am suddenly a confused old woman who urgently needs legal guardianship. Brandon attempted to take a step closer to me, but I swiftly backed away. He was no longer the little boy who ran into my arms when he had a bad dream. He was a 35-year-old man who viewed his mother as a major obstacle standing between himself and a comfortable, debt-free life financed by someone else. Mom, we made a mistake, he said, his voice attempting to sound remorseful, but only sounding rehearsed. The wedding was a total misunderstanding. Tiffany was nervous. I was under so much pressure. We can fix this if you just become reasonable again. Reasonable? The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. Being reasonable means continuing to pay for your life while you treat me like a stranger. It means pretending it doesn't profoundly hurt to have been excluded from the most important day of my only son's life. Mr. Fisher began packing up his papers with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to having his proposals rejected. Mrs. Richter, this is absolutely not over. Your family has other legal options. If you are, in fact, making irrational decisions due to mental health problems, a judge can legally determine that you require guardianship. His words landed like a physical blow. I realized this wasn't just a manipulative family visit. It was a very real, very serious legal threat. They intended to legally declare me incompetent to manage my own affairs. Mr. Fisher, I said, Looking him directly in the eye, my voice low and steady, I strongly suggest you do your research thoroughly before you threaten a 71-year-old woman who has managed her finances flawlessly for 40 years, who raised her son alone after the death of her husband, who ran a successful household and worked honorably until retirement, and who until last week was completely financially supporting two perfectly capable adults. Tiffany finally stopped crying and looked at me with a stark coldness that, for the first time, truly revealed her terrifying, true face. "This won't stand, Brenda. We have rights. And we have lawyers, too." "Perfect," I replied instantly. "Hire all the lawyers you want. With your own money, of course. Because mine is no longer available to finance your legal tantrums." The three of them marched toward the door with the wounded, ridiculous dignity of people who are not used to being told no. Before he stepped out, Brandon turned to me one last time, his voice laced with venom. "Mom, this is going to end very badly for you. You're going to end up completely alone, with no one left to take care of you when you truly need it." "Brandon," I said, a deep sadness in my voice, but also a crystalline clarity, "I am already alone. The only difference is that now it is entirely by my own choice, not by your deliberate neglect." As I firmly closed and locked the door behind them, I stood in my living room, surrounded by the most beautiful, liberating silence I had heard in years. It was the absolute silence of freedom. You have to keep reading to see my next shocking move that sealed their fate. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink, but it wasn't due to sadness or regret. It was the electrifying adrenaline of having violently reclaimed control of my own life. I lay awake in bed, my mind racing, meticulously planning my next moves like a seasoned general preparing for a critical battle. If Brandon and Tiffany wanted a financial fight, I would gladly give them a war. But this war would be fought with cold, surgical intelligence, not with wasteful emotion. At 6 o'clock the next morning, I was already dressed, sharp, and ready to move. My first destination was the office of attorney Mr. Alan Weber, a man I had met years ago when he handled my late husband Robert's estate. Unlike the predatory Dr. Fisher whom Brandon and Tiffany had brought, Mr. Weber possessed an impeccable reputation and specialized in protecting the rights of the elderly. "Brenda, what your children attempted to do yesterday is far more common than you might think," he told me after I recounted the entire, ugly confrontation. "It's called elder financial abuse, and it's a serious crime. The fact that they entered your home without permission and reviewed your private documents also constitutes a severe violation." His words were both deeply calming and profoundly worrying. They calmed me because they confirmed I wasn't just an overwhelmed old woman, I was a victim of genuine, documented abuse. They worried me because I finally grasped that the situation was far more dangerous than I had initially calculated. "We have to document absolutely everything, Mr. Weber continued, already pulling out a fresh legal pad. "Every single transfer, every gift, every time they pressured you for money. Crucially, we will also immediately change your will to protect your assets from any future attempts at manipulation or coercion." We spent a focused 3 hours poring over my financial records, meticulously building a case file. Mr. Weber let out a low whistle when he saw the final, total sum, $33,400 over 3 years. "Mrs. Richter, with this money, you could have traveled the world, lived in comfort, and genuinely enjoyed your well-earned retirement. Instead, you completely financed the lives of 2 adults who couldn't even manage the simple decency of inviting you to their wedding." The shocking dollar amount of my generosity was about to become my ultimate weapon. When I left Mr. Weber's office, I had a complete, 3-phase plan etched into my mind. First, I would change every lock on my house. Second, I would install a professional, comprehensive security system with cameras to shield myself from future surprise visits. Third, I would open a new, completely isolated bank account at a different institution where they had 0 contacts. And fourth, I would finally start living the life I had ruthlessly postponed for years. My next stop was the local hardware store. The owner, a kind man named Mr. Summer, had known me for years because I was always buying supplies to fix something at Brandon and Tiffany's rental apartment. This time, everything felt different. Mrs. Richter, what can I get for you today? Another emergency at your son's place, he asked with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had silently witnessed my wasted generosity. No, Mr. Summer, I replied with a new, quiet authority. This time, it's strictly for my own house. I need to replace all the exterior locks, and I want the best, most secure quality you carry. He looked at me with open surprise, but wisely asked no further questions. As I was selecting the heavy-duty deadbolts, his son, Ethan, who specialized in installing security systems, walked by. It was Providence in action. Ethan, I told him, I also need you to install surveillance cameras, the full, comprehensive system. The final price is absolutely not an issue. While they were preparing the installation for the very next day, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Tiffany, calling from someone else's cell because I had successfully blocked her and Brandon's numbers after the previous day's dramatic confrontation. Brenda, it's Tiffany. Please don't hang up. We need to talk like rational, civilized adults. Speak, I said, my voice dry and devoid of warmth. Listen, I understand you're still upset about the wedding. It was a massive mistake. Brandon and I have talked, and we desperately want to make it up to you. How about we have a special dinner to celebrate our marriage, just for you? We can have it at your house. We can cook together, just like we used to. The manipulation in her voice was so thinly veiled, so utterly transparent, that I almost had to laugh out loud. But I hit her with the one question she couldn't evade. Tiffany, exactly how many months of rent do you owe right now? The silence that followed was a damning confirmation that I had instantly struck a nerve. Well, it's about 2 months. $1,000 total. But I'm not just calling for that, Brenda. We really, truly miss you in our lives. Do you miss me, or do you miss my money? I asked, cutting directly to the core. Both, she replied with a surprising, desperate honesty. Brenda, I won't lie to you. Yes, we desperately need your financial help, but we also love you. You are absolutely important to us. If I am so important, I pressed, the steel in my voice never wavering. Why was I not important enough to be at your wedding? Why am I not important enough to receive a single phone call that doesn't end with a demand for money? When was the last time you called me just to ask how I was doing? Another painful, telling silence. We both knew the answer, never. Tiffany, I said, delivering my final statement, I am only going to explain this to you once. For 3 long years, you treated me like an ATM with a lingering pulse. You used me. You consistently ignored me. You utterly humiliated me. And finally, you insulted me in the most devastating way possible. Now that the money faucet has run dry, you suddenly discover that you love me. Brenda, please. She pleaded. I cut her off sharply. There is no please. You made your definitive choice when you decided I wasn't special enough to be at your wedding. Now I am making mine. I hung up the phone and switched it completely off. I would tolerate no further interruptions on my day of liberation. That was the final call, but the most shocking drama was yet to come. That afternoon, I treated myself to the finest beauty salon in the area, a place I hadn't stepped foot in for over a year. I always canceled my appointments because Brandon or Tiffany would suddenly need something urgent, or because the money I had set aside for myself would become an emergency fund for them. Mrs. Richter, my favorite stylist, Cynthia, exclaimed. What a wonderful surprise. I thought you had completely forgotten about us. I didn't forget you, Cynthia. I corrected her, sitting down in the chair with a sigh of relief. I just forgot that I also deserve to be pampered. I indulged in the full luxury treatment, a fresh cut, a vibrant color, a professional manicure, and a relaxing pedicure. For the first time in years, I spent money on myself without a single twinge of guilt. While Cynthia worked, she chatted about her own life, her children, her dreams, her plans. It was incredibly refreshing to have a conversation that did not revolve around the endless, crushing needs of Brandon and Tiffany. You look absolutely beautiful, Mrs. Richter, Cynthia declared when she finished. But more importantly, you look free. Did something truly wonderful happen? Yes, Cynthia, I replied, looking at my reflection, seeing a powerful, new woman staring back. I finally learned to say no. When I returned home that evening, there was a strange car parked in front of my door. My heart jumped for a moment, thinking Brandon and Tiffany had returned with reinforcements, but as I got closer, I saw an older woman sitting patiently on my porch steps. "Mrs. Richter," she asked as I got out of my car. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Eleanor Brooks. I live right next door. We've been neighbors for years, but we've never really had a chance to connect. Yesterday, I heard some very loud voices coming from your house, and I grew worried. Is everything truly all right?" Her sincere, unsolicited concern touched me deeply. Here was a complete stranger showing more genuine interest in my well-being than my own son. "Please, come in, Mrs. Brooks. I'll make us a fresh coffee, and I'll tell you a story you simply won't believe." While the coffee brewed, I recounted the entire, excruciating situation. Eleanor listened intently, nodding knowingly, not once interrupting. When I finally finished my painful story, her eyes were filled with profound sympathy, not pity. "Mrs. Richter, you absolutely did the right thing," she said softly. "I went through a heartbreakingly similar situation with my own daughter 5 years ago. I also believed it was my sacred duty to finance her entire adult life. I also thought they wouldn't love me if I didn't give them money." "What happened?" I asked, leaning forward eagerly. "I cut off the money the instant I realized they only called me when they needed something. At first, it was absolutely terrible. They threatened me, they emotionally blackmailed me, they tried every tactic to make me feel guilty. But after 6 long months, my daughter called me to offer a genuine apology. Now, we have a real relationship, one built on mutual love and respect, not on money." Her words flooded me with hope and firmly confirmed that I had made the correct, necessary decision. "Do you think Brandon and Tiffany will ever understand this one day?" I asked, my voice fragile. "Maybe yes and maybe no," she answered with refreshing honesty. "But that is no longer your responsibility, Mrs. Richter. Your sole responsibility now is to live your own life." That night, for the very first time in 3 years, I went to bed without worrying about whether Brandon and Tiffany had enough money for the rent, for food, or for their latest frivolous whim. I went to bed thinking only about myself, my own new plans, and my own future. And I slept better than I had in years. But my new peace was about to be shattered by their desperate, shocking retaliation. The very next day, Ethan and Mr. Summer arrived promptly at 8 in the morning to change the locks and install the sophisticated security system. While they worked, my phone rang nonstop from a series of unknown numbers. Tiffany was relentless, attempting to reach me from every burner phone and landline she could find, but I had developed a crucial new skill, the absolute, serene ability to ignore any call that didn't serve my newfound peace. "Mrs. Richter," Ethan explained as he meticulously calibrated the security cameras, "this system is going to give you absolute peace of mind. You'll be able to view anyone approaching your house right from your phone, even when you're away. And if anyone tries to break in without authorization, an alert is automatically sent directly to the police." The searing irony of the situation did not escape me. I was installing a professional security system to protect myself from my own son. But the thought no longer caused me the crippling pain it once did. It was simply a practical, necessary measure to maintain my precious, hard-won peace. I knew that every piece of footage would be critical to my bigger plan. While they were finishing the installation, I decided to do something I had put off for years: call my sister, Marilyn, in Chicago. We had drifted apart because every time we spoke, I felt compelled to brag about Brandon and Tiffany's manufactured successes, detailing how much money I had spent on them and how proud I was to be able to help. I now realized that our conversations had sadly devolved into financial reports thinly disguised as family news. "Brenda," Marilyn answered, clearly surprised. "Sister, how are you? We haven't spoken in months." "I'm good, Marilyn. Better than good, actually. I'm calling you to tell you that I've finally come to my senses." I recounted the entire, excruciating story from the beginning: the secret, humiliating wedding, the lawyer visit, the final, decisive action to cut off the funding. Marilyn listened in dead silence, waiting patiently until I was done. Her response stunned me. "Brenda, sister, it was about time. Every single time we spoke, it absolutely broke my heart to hear you constantly measuring your love in dollars. I wanted to tell you this, but I didn't know how. What did you want to tell me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. That Brandon never spoke lovingly about you when I saw him at family gatherings. It was always, my mom helped me with this, or my mom bought me that, but never, I miss my mom, or I love my mom. It was as if you were a service provider, not a human being. Her words were unnecessary, deep-cutting pain, like a surgeon cleaning an infected wound. It hurt, but it was essential for the healing. You know what else I noticed? Marilyn continued, her voice heavy with revelation. Tiffany always spoke about you in the future tense. When Brenda is no longer here, we can finally remodel her house, or when we inherit, we will invest in that business. It was as if they were literally waiting for you to die so they could truly start living. This revelation hit me with the force of a tidal wave. They didn't just see me as an ATM. They saw me as a temporary obstacle standing between them and a large sum of money. While I was sacrificing my savings and my happiness to make them comfortable, they were coldly planning their entire future without me in it. This was the real key to the revenge. I would use their own chilling calculation against them. After the call, I sat quietly in my kitchen, processing the devastating information. Years of genuine marriage to a man who truly loved me, 35 years of raising my son alone, and 3 years of financing 2 adults who saw me as nothing more than a 6-figure obstacle. The doorbell suddenly rang. On my brand new security monitor, I saw it was Eleanor, my neighbor, holding a steaming mug in her hands. I opened the door, and she handed me a fresh coffee. I thought you might need some company after everything you told me yesterday, she said with that sincere smile I had come to appreciate so deeply. We sat down in my secure living room, and Eleanor shared more painful details from her own experience. My daughter used the exact same phrases on me that Tiffany uses on you. You're like a second mom to me. We're special to you. Everything will be ours one day anyway. Those are rehearsed phrases, Mrs. Richter. They read from the Emotional Manipulation Handbook. Do you actually think such a handbook exists? I asked, half-jokingly. Not officially, but it seems everyone is reading from the same edition. Chapter 1 is Make Her Feel Indispensable. Chapter 2 is Create Constant Financial Emergencies. Chapter 3 is When She Resists, Question Her Mental Health. We laughed, a bitter, tragic laugh. It was both darkly funny and deeply tragic to recognize such predictable patterns in the behavior of our own children. Did you ever feel guilty for cutting off the money? I asked Eleanor, seeking real wisdom. Every single day for the first 3 months, she answered honestly. But then I started to see the genuine results. My daughter had to get a second job. Her husband stopped playing golf every weekend and had to start looking for extra work. They learned to live within their actual means. And most importantly, they learned that I was a person, not a resource. That afternoon, I finally decided to do something I had put off for years. Visit my husband Robert's grave. I had always made excuses. Brandon or Tiffany needed something urgent, or the taxi fare was better invested in one of their never-ending emergencies. The cemetery was quiet and beautiful. Robert's grave looked slightly neglected, as I hadn't been there to clean it in months. I sat on the grass beside his headstone and began to talk to him as if he were still alive. Robert, my love, I think I completely lost myself for a while. After you left, I poured every ounce of my energy into Brandon. I wanted to be the perfect mother, thinking somehow I could compensate for him growing up without his father. But I think, in the process, I forgot how to be myself. Our son has become someone I no longer recognize. Or maybe he was always like this, and I simply refused to see it. The money you left for me to live peacefully, I spent it caring for them. But not anymore, my love. I have finally learned. I lovingly cleaned his grave, replaced the withered flowers with new ones, and stayed for another peaceful hour, just enjoying the silence. For the first time in years, I was not rushing home to solve a financial crisis for Brandon and Tiffany. When I eventually pulled into my driveway, I saw 3 cars parked outside my house again. My heart pounded once more, but this time, I was fully prepared. The security cameras immediately showed me it was Brandon, Tiffany, and 2 other unfamiliar people. Everyone looked agitated, pointing and gesturing angrily toward my house. I did not get out of the car. Instead, I immediately called Mr. Weber, my lawyer. Mr. Weber, they're at my house again. This time, they've brought more people. What do I do? Do not get out of your car, Mrs. Richter. I am coming there immediately, and I am calling the police right now. After our discussion yesterday, I requested a temporary restraining order. They are legally not allowed to be on your property. Minutes later, Mr. Weber's car and 2 police patrol cars arrived. I watched the officers calmly approach Brandon and Tiffany. I watched my son gesticulate wildly with anger. I watched Tiffany start crying again, but this time, her performance did not move me an inch. One of the officers approached my car window. "Ma'am, you can get out now safely. Your visitors are leaving immediately." As I stepped out of the car, Brandon shouted at me from the curb. "Mom, this is utterly ridiculous. We are your family. You can't call the police on your own son." "Brandon," I replied, with a terrifying calm, "family does not threaten lawsuits for mental incompetence. Family does not break into people's homes without permission. Family does not treat their mother like an ATM." Tiffany screamed across the lawn, "You are going to pay us everything you owe us. We have bills you co-signed. You can't just abandon us like this." Mr. Weber stepped forward, his voice a sharp, cutting force. "Mrs. Richter has no current financial obligation to either of you. Any future communication must go through my office, and I strongly suggest you consult with an attorney before making collection threats, because my client has a complete paper trail documenting every payment she voluntarily made for the past 3 years." I watched them drive away in their defeated cars, a look of pure, frustrated fury on their faces. I knew this was far from over, but for the first time in this nightmare, I felt completely confident. I had professional legal help. I had the crucial emotional support of Eleanor. And most importantly, I had the mental clarity to know what was right and what was absolutely wrong. That night, Eleanor invited me over for dinner. I met her visiting daughter and witnessed firsthand what a genuinely healthy family relationship looked like. They spoke respectfully, asked sincerely about each other's lives, and laughed together. Her daughter did not ask for money once the entire evening. "I wanted that with Brandon, too," I confessed to Eleanor after her daughter left. "And perhaps you'll get it one day," she replied softly. "But first, he has to learn that you are a person who deserves respect, not just a source of easy income." For the first time in weeks, I went to bed feeling truly hopeful about the coming future. But their next move was a devastating betrayal I never saw coming. The next few days settled into a strange, uneasy peace. The surveillance cameras showed me that Brandon and Tiffany were now driving past my house several times a day, sometimes slowly creeping by, other times parking for a few minutes down the street, but they never got out. It was as if they were meticulously studying my routine, desperate to find the perfect moment for their next move. Mr. Weber had given me a strict instruction: document every single visit. I kept a detailed log with the exact date and time. "Their persistence will actually work in our favor," he had assured me. "Every time they show up after we've told them not to approach, it strengthens our case for a permanent restraining order." On a quiet Friday morning, I was enjoying a leisurely breakfast when the doorbell rang. The cameras showed a very well-dressed young woman standing on my porch with a folder in her hands and a practiced, professional smile. I didn't recognize her, but something in her rigid posture signaled this was far from a social call. "Good morning, Mrs. Brenda Richter," she said as I opened the door. "I am Mrs. Schmidt, a social investigator from the Office of Senior Services. We've received a report that you may be in an at-risk situation, and we need to conduct a welfare check." My blood ran cold. Brandon and Tiffany had drastically escalated the situation. It was no longer just empty threats from private, expensive lawyers. Now, they had cleverly involved the government. "May I see your ID, please?" I asked, striving to keep my voice even. "Of course." She presented an official-looking ID that appeared genuine. "I am social worker Mrs. Schmidt. May I come in and speak with you?" I let her in, knowing that a refusal would only make my case look worse. Mrs. Schmidt settled onto my living room sofa and pulled a formal intake form from her folder. "Mrs. Richter, we have received reports that you have exhibited significant changes in your financial behavior, that you have abruptly cut off communication with your immediate family. and that you have shown signs of paranoia by installing unnecessary security systems. We were also informed that you have refused medical and legal assistance from your loved ones. Every single word had been carefully selected and precisely weaponized to make me sound like a senile, mentally unstable old woman. I immediately recognized Tiffany's manipulative hand in the wording. She had always been brilliant at twisting language to achieve her selfish goals. "Mrs. Schmidt," I stated with every ounce of dignity I could muster, "I would like to call my lawyer before I answer any questions." "Ma'am, this is not a legal interrogation. It's just a welfare check. If you truly have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem to speak with me." The condescending phrase, "if you have nothing to hide," infuriated me. It was the same insidious logic abusers use to justify their invasions. "Miss, I am calling my lawyer. You can wait here in my living room or return another day, but I will not answer any questions without legal representation present." I immediately called Mr. Weber, and he arrived at my house in under 20 minutes. When he saw the social worker, his expression hardened instantly. "Miss Schmidt," he began, after quickly verifying her ID, "I sincerely hope you have a court order to be here, because my client is under my direct legal representation, and any unauthorized investigation constitutes harassment." "Sir," Mrs. Schmidt replied, her voice now much less confident than before. "We have reports from deeply concerned family members regarding the lady's well-being. It is our duty to investigate." "What family?" Mr. Weber asked dryly. "The same family that recently tried to get her to sign a power of attorney without legal representation? The same family that broke into her home without permission and rifled through her private documents? The same family that purposefully excluded her from important life events while living exclusively off her money?" Mr. Weber took a legal folder from his briefcase and placed it squarely on the coffee table. "Here is complete documentation of my client's financial and emotional abuse. $33,400 systematically withdrawn from her accounts in 3 years. Systematic social exclusion and blatant emotional blackmail. If someone needs to be investigated here, it is certainly not my client." Mrs. Schmidt reviewed the documentation with obvious, growing discomfort. It was becoming clear that the malicious report she had been given did not align with the reality she was witnessing in front of her. "Mrs. Richter," she finally asked, turning to me, "can you explain to me why you so abruptly halted financial support for your son?" "Because I finally discovered they were using me," I replied simply, my voice unwavering. "Because I realized that to them, I was not a mother, but merely a bank account. Because I was tired of financing the lives of two people who saw me only as an obstacle." "But don't you feel it's your basic responsibility to help your family?" The question outraged me. "Miss Schmidt, my responsibility as a mother was to raise my son until he was 18, to educate him, and to give him the necessary tools to become an independent adult. My son is 35 years old, married, and perfectly capable of supporting himself. Financing his adult life is not my responsibility. It is my choice, and I have chosen not to do so anymore." Mr. Weber interjected with a challenging tone. "Miss Schmidt, would you consider it normal for a 35-year-old adult to be completely unable to pay his own rent without the ongoing help of his 71-year-old mother?" Mrs. Schmidt hesitated, clearly reevaluating the entire situation. "Mrs. Richter," she asked after a moment, "do you manage your own finances completely?" "I can show you my bank statements, my investments, my tax payments. Everything is current and perfectly in order." "Do you live independently?" "As you can plainly see, I keep my house clean, I take care of myself physically, I drive my own car, and I maintain healthy social relationships with my neighbors." "Do you take any necessary medication?" "Only vitamins and occasional aspirin. I have no medical conditions that require prescription medication." Mr. Weber added the final crushing blow. "My client has just undergone extensive medical examinations as part of our legal process. She is in perfect mental and physical condition." Mrs. Schmidt quietly closed her folder. "Mrs. Richter, based on this conversation and the documentation I have reviewed, I see no indication that you are at risk or in need of state intervention. I will be closing this case immediately." After she left, Mr. Weber and I remained in a thoughtful silence. "Brenda," he said finally, his expression serious, This is going to continue to escalate. Brandon and Tiffany are spending money they don't have to hire professionals to try and have you legally declared incompetent. Does that mean they are desperate? I asked. That means exactly that. What else can they do? They can officially file a lawsuit for incompetence. It's expensive and hard to win, but if they find a sympathetic judge and a corrupt psychiatrist willing to testify in their favor, they could potentially get a guardian assigned. The thought terrified me to my core. They could actually gain control of my money. They can certainly try, Mr. Weber countered, his voice resolute. But we have solid, irrefutable evidence of your mental competence and their clear financial motivations. We are going to fight this to the very end. That afternoon, I called Marilyn to vent the entire stressful encounter. Sister, she said after hearing my story, do you see how far they are willing to go just for money? They are risking their entire family relationship, spending money on lawyers and doctors, destroying their own reputation, all just to get access to your bank account again. Her words crystallized the truth. Brandon and Tiffany had completely, irrevocably revealed their true nature. There was no going back. There was zero possibility of a genuine reconciliation. To them, I had never been a mother or a respected mother-in-law. I had always only been money on legs. This painful revelation was also the most profound liberation. I no longer had to wonder if I was making the right decision. I no longer had to feel a shred of guilt for protecting myself. They had proven, beyond any doubt, that my emotional and physical well-being was less important to them than my money. That evening, Eleanor arrived with a surprise. She had invited her close friends from the garden club to meet me. Brenda, she introduced me. These are my friends, Cynthia, who you already know from the salon, Maria, Carmen, and Alfreda. We have all been through heartbreakingly similar situations with financially abusive family members. We spent the entire evening sharing war stories. Maria had been forced to set ironclad boundaries with a brother who constantly demanded cash. Carmen had severed her relationship with a daughter who only visited when she needed money. Alfreda, the wisest of them all, had been forced to change her will after discovering her own grandchildren viewed her as their retirement plan. What hurts me the most, I confess to my new sisterhood, is not losing the money I gave them, but realizing that I never actually had the love I thought I had. Brenda, Alfreda said, her voice gentle but firm with 80 years of wisdom. True love cannot be bought or sold. If you had to pay for it, it was never, ever real. Her words were a healing balm for my wounded soul. She was right. I had bought attention, not love. I had financed a complete illusion. You know what I've discovered? I said, looking around at my new friends. Loneliness when you're surrounded by people who don't love you is infinitely worse than being lonely on your own. At least now, when I am alone, I am in good company. Everyone laughed, and we raised a final toast to our newfound wisdom. That night, after my friends had left, I sat out in my garden, gazing up at the stars. They seemed to shine brighter than ever, or perhaps I was finally seeing them with clearer eyes. For the first time in my entire adult life, I was completely financially alone. I had no dependents, no obligations to anyone but myself. And instead of scaring me, this new reality filled me with pure excitement. I could travel when I wanted. I could remodel my home. I could buy myself beautiful clothes. I could donate to the charities that mattered to me. I could finally invest in my own future instead of financing the miserable present of two ungrateful adults. Freedom tasted like hope. And for the first time in years, I genuinely wanted to start planning my future. But the quiet storm was about to break, and their final legal move was the most desperate betrayal of all. The trial date arrived 3 weeks later. I woke up early, put on my best black power suit, and looked at myself in the mirror with a focused determination I'd never felt before. Today, they wouldn't just be judging my mental capacity, they would be judging my dignity as a person, my right to live free from abuse, and my value beyond the zero balance of my bank account. Mr. Weber arrived promptly at 7 in the morning to review our strategy one last time. Brenda, remember this. The heavy burden of proof is entirely on them, he stated firmly. They have to legally prove that you are incompetent. We just have to successfully show that you are not. And what if the judge is already biased? Judge Miller has a strong reputation for being fair. I've thoroughly researched his past cases. He doesn't automatically favor families. He is committed to protecting the fundamental rights of the elderly. My freedom and my $33,400 life savings depended entirely on his integrity. We arrived at the courthouse at 9 in the morning. In the crowded hallway, I immediately spotted Brandon in a new suit he had likely bought for the occasion, and Tiffany, dressed entirely in black, as if she were attending a funeral. Perhaps it was the funeral of our relationship. When our eyes met, Brandon quickly avoided my gaze, but Tiffany held my stare with a cold, predatory look that confirmed for me that this was purely a business transaction. Their lawyer, an older, elegant man, had the kind of smug confidence that came from successfully winning these types of cases before. When he began his opening statement, his strategy was surgically clear: to portray me, Brenda Richter, as a confused, vulnerable old woman who had been viciously manipulated by greedy strangers to alienate her from her loving family. "Your Honor," he declared in a solemn, theatrical voice, "Mrs. Brenda Richter has exhibited a clear and undeniable mental decline in recent months. She cut off all financial support for her family without any rational explanation. She installed unnecessary, expensive security systems due to sheer paranoia, and has isolated herself from her loving family under the harmful influence of neighbors and unscrupulous lawyers who are clearly taking advantage of her vulnerable situation." Every single word was a deliberate twist, making my self-empowerment sound like dementia and my newfound freedom sound like sinister, external manipulation. The entire court was hooked on their sensational story. They immediately called their witnesses. Tiffany was the first to testify, and her performance was worthy of an Oscar. She dabbed at fake tears as she dramatically described how I had completely changed, how I had become hostile and paranoid, and how I had isolated myself from the family that truly loves me. "Your Honor," she whispered in a trembling voice, "Brenda has always been like a second mom to me. Watching her sudden mental decline has been utterly devastating. We just want to help her get the professional care she desperately needs." Lies wrapped in convincingly wet tears. When Mr. Weber began his cross-examination, the cracks in her meticulously crafted story instantly began to show. "Mrs. Schuster," he asked, using her married name, "can you tell the court the last time you called my client without asking her for money?" Tiffany stammered. "Well, we always talked about many things. Can you give me a specific date?" I don't recall exact dates. Is it true that you and your husband married without inviting my client?" "It was a very small, intimate ceremony." "And is it true that when my client asked about the wedding, you told her that you had only invited special people?" Tiffany's face flushed a deep crimson. Those words were taken completely out of context. What, exactly, would be the right context to tell your mother-in-law that she is not a special person? She could offer no convincing answer. Brandon was next. Seeing him on the witness stand, swearing to tell the truth while preparing to lie about my mental health, was the most painful moment of my life. This was the boy I had raised alone, the person I had dedicated my entire life to. "My mom has always been so very generous with us," he testified. "But lately, she has become erratic and irrational. We truly believe she is being manipulated by people who are taking advantage of her." When Mr. Weber cross-examined him, the mask of the devoted son shattered completely. "Mr. Richter, how much money have you received from your mother over the last 3 years?" "I don't know the exact amount. Does $33,400 sound about right?" "Maybe. She has always been generous." "And how many times have you visited your mother without asking her for money?" The silence in the courtroom was absolutely deafening. "Is it true that you and your wife broke into my client's house without permission and reviewed her private documents?" "We were worried about her." "Is it true that you brought a lawyer to pressure her into signing a power of attorney?" "We wanted to help her manage her finances." "Do you, at 35 years old, require the financial help of your 71-year-old mother to pay your rent?" Brandon could not answer with any dignity. Mr. Davis testified about my supposed erratic behaviors, but when Mr. Weber pressed him for specific details, he admitted that he had never once spoken to me directly and that all his information was based on malicious, superficial observations. Dr. Lehman testified that my refusal to undergo his evaluation was proof of mental decline, but Mr. Weber immediately submitted the documentation of my professional evaluation with Dr. Moore, which completely refuted his hurried conclusions. Their entire case was built on a flimsy foundation of lies and manipulation. Then it was our turn. Mr. Weber first called Mr. Green, my pharmacist, who explained under oath how he had been tricked into signing a statement that distorted my medication buying habits. Dr. Moore testified about my excellent mental state and presented the flawless results of my cognitive tests. Mr. Summer from the hardware store testified about my mental confidence, confirming that my decisions to install the security system and cancel the transfers were entirely rational and properly executed. Eleanor and my friends from the Garden Club testified about my mental clarity, my newfound vitality, and my ability to maintain healthy social relationships. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I stood up with immense dignity and walked to the witness stand, feeling the strength of 71 years of experience, of wisdom earned through pain, and of strength discovered in adversity. Mr. Weber guided me through my story. The $33,400 spent in 3 years, the deep humiliation of being excluded from the wedding, the constant emotional manipulation, the violation of my privacy, the legal threats. Mrs. Richter, Mr. Weber finally asked, "Why did you make the decision to stop financial support for your son and daughter-in-law?" "Because I finally understood that what I was receiving from them was not love," I replied in a clear, resonant voice. It was a commercial transaction, thinly disguised as a family relationship. My money was always welcome, but I, as a person, was not. Do you regret your decision now? I only regret that it took me so long to finally make it. Brandon's lawyer desperately tried to make me appear confused during his cross-examination, but I answered every one of his questions with sharp clarity and precision. When he tried to imply that my new friendships had manipulated me, I explained to him that for the first time in years, I had relationships built on mutual respect, not on financial interest. In his closing argument, Brandon's lawyer insisted that I was merely a victim of external manipulation. Mr. Weber's rebuttal was absolutely devastating. "Your Honor, what we have witnessed here is not the case of an incompetent old woman, but the case of a woman who finally found the strength to liberate herself from years of financial and emotional abuse. The plaintiffs have presented zero genuine medical evidence of mental incompetence. What they have presented is their immense frustration because their source of income has decided to exercise her legal and moral right to protect her own resources." Judge Miller retired to deliberate for 2 hours that felt like 2 years. When he returned, his expression was serious, but his gaze was clear. After reviewing all the evidence presented, he began, "It is utterly obvious to this court that Mrs. Brenda Richter is in full possession of her mental faculties. Professional psychiatric evaluations confirm her cognitive competence. Her financial decisions, however painful they may be for her family, are entirely rational and within her rights." My heart began to pound with hopeful fury. Furthermore, the judge continued, his voice ringing with authority, "The evidence strongly suggests that this lawsuit is motivated by financial interest rather than by genuine, sincere concern for Mrs. Richter's well-being. The court completely and emphatically denies the request for guardianship." I had won. I had not just won a lawsuit, I had won my freedom, my dignity, and my absolute right to live free from the abuse of those who claimed to love me. As we left the courthouse, I saw Brandon and Tiffany arguing furiously with their lawyer. Tiffany shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred before marching away. Brandon looked at me one last time, and for a fleeting second, I saw something that might have been regret, but it was already far too late. The battle was won, but my final, planned act of revenge was the one that would truly make them pay. The immediate aftermath of my victory in court and the subsequent sale of the house was a period of profound, almost surreal peace. For weeks, the only sound was the gentle click of my security system locking the door and the soft, satisfied hum of my own thoughts. Brandon and Tiffany were completely silent. The formal, devastating letter, Mr. Weber sent them detailing the irrevocable trust, the exclusion from the will, and the documented evidence of their attempted real estate fraud. Had the desired effect, it was a final, crushing blow that silenced their legal tantrums forever. I spent the first few weeks in my beautiful new apartment near the city center simply relearning how to be me. I opened the windows to let in the fresh air, unconcerned about what neighbors might observe. I bought a vibrant new wardrobe, choosing clothes that made me feel happy, not clothes I thought would make me look respectable at some family function I wasn't even invited to. I took long, solitary walks through the bustling city parks, drinking in the atmosphere and realizing that this vibrant, independent life was exactly what I had denied myself for years. I had traded a suburban cage for a city sanctuary. The $100,000 charity gambit. One of the first acts of my new life was to fulfill the purpose of the irrevocable trust one had established with Mr. Weber. While the main body of the trust was designed to support me for life, I decided to make a dramatic, immediate gesture with a portion of the liquidated assets. I called Mr. Weber and instructed him to draw up documents to donate $100,000 to 3 specific charitable organizations. A foundation dedicated to elder financial abuse prevention, a local shelter for women in crisis, a scholarship fund for art students. The transfer was public, announced with a small, discreet piece in the local society section of the newspaper. The delicious irony was palpable. The money Brandon and Tiffany had spent 3 years trying to seize, the money they had plotted to steal by having me declared incompetent, was now being used to fight people exactly like them and to support the hobbies I had sacrificed for their greed. I knew they would see the announcement. They would see the staggering sum, money that could have paid off their rent and debt many times over, being given away to strangers and to causes I cared about. The sting of this public, deliberate, and entirely legal action was, in many ways, a far sharper form of revenge than any legal battle. I had turned their planned inheritance into a weapon against their own greed, Eleanor's wisdom, and new adventures. My friendship with Eleanor deepened significantly. She was more than a neighbor, she was a sister in survival. We began taking art classes together. I went back to painting, and she took up pottery. We planned our first international trip, a 2-week tour of the Tuscan countryside. You know, Brenda, Eleanor said to me one afternoon over espresso, the best thing you ever gave Brandon and Tiffany was the gift of necessity. You forced them to finally stand on their own 2 feet. Maybe, just maybe, that will eventually turn into a kind of twisted growth for them. Maybe, I replied, sipping my coffee. But I'm not waiting around to see it. My life is too precious now. I thought about Brandon. I knew from mutual, distant acquaintances that he was now working 2 jobs, and Tiffany had finally been forced to find employment. They had moved into a much smaller, less comfortable apartment. The adversity I had thrust upon them was forcing them to learn independence, something my reckless generosity had prevented for years. I felt no satisfaction in their hardship, but I felt immense satisfaction in my own unburdened conscience. I had done my job as a mother. My job as an ATM was over. A glimpse into the past. One morning, my phone buzzed with an email. It was from Mr. Weber, titled, "For your information." It was a cryptic attachment, a copy of an old, tattered piece of paper. It was my original will, drafted 5 years prior, before the constant financial abuse began. I opened it and read the provisions for the first time in years. It was simple. Brandon was to receive 100% of my assets, including the house, upon my death. I sat there, staring at the document, realizing the horrifying truth. They had almost succeeded. If I had died even a year ago, they would have gotten everything. My death would have been their biggest financial triumph. I had almost left my entire life's work and Robert's legacy to 2 people who viewed me as nothing more than a temporary obstruction. I calmly deleted the file, a sense of immense gratitude washing over me. I was alive, competent, and free. And the only person I was taking care of was the woman who truly deserved it, me. The relative peace I had enjoyed in my new apartment was finally shattered one evening, 5 months after the trial. I was enjoying a quiet evening, sipping tea and working on a difficult watercolor, when the phone rang from an unknown number. My fingers hovered over the ignore button, but a sudden, uncharacteristic curiosity, a tiny crack in my otherwise solid resolve, made me answer. Hello, Brenda? It's Brandon. Please don't hang up. Please. His voice was unrecognizable. Gone was the petulant arrogance, the rehearsed guilt, the condescending tone. He sounded tired, hollow, and genuinely defeated. What do you want, Brandon? All communication must go through Mr. Weber's office, as you know. I know. But the lawyer, he quit. We can't afford him anymore. We can't afford anyone. He took a shaky breath. We lost the apartment, Mom. We're staying with Tiffany's parents. They don't treat me very well. They blame me for everything. I remained silent, letting the raw reality of his new life hang in the air. This was the hardship Eleanor had spoken of, the gift of necessity. It was also the bitter fruit of their own greed. I called to apologize, he continued, the words strained and difficult. Not for the money or for losing the house. I'm sorry about the house, but I called to apologize for the wedding. For the special people comment. Tiffany said it, but I stood there and let her humiliate you. And I let her bring that lawyer to your house. I let her tell people you were confused. I was weak, Mom. I was a coward, and I used you. The confession was devastatingly honest, but after all the lies, I struggled to process it. I thought about the forged deed, the incompetence lawsuit, the $33,400 I'd sacrificed. Brandon, I said, my voice low and steady, apologies don't erase the paperwork. They don't erase the night you tried to have me legally stripped of my dignity. And they certainly don't change the fact that you saw me as an obstacle to an inheritance, not as a mother. I know, he whispered. But I had to try. Now that everything is gone, I realized that I missed the person who actually loved me, not the one who bought me things. I guess I just wanted to know if there's any way, ever, that you could forgive me. His question was the final, agonizing hurdle. Could I forgive him? I thought of Robert, my late husband, whose legacy I had sworn to protect. I thought of the women in the elder abuse prevention charity my money was now supporting. Most importantly, I thought of Brenda, the strong, free woman I had painstakingly fought to become. Forgiveness was a beautiful concept, but in this case, it was also a profound risk. Brandon, I finally said, making the definitive choice that would shape the rest of our lives. I am not going to forgive you right now. Maybe one day I will. But what you did requires more than words. It requires time, and it requires you to prove, over years, that you are a different man. And I can't afford to risk my freedom again to test you. The trust is ironclad, I continued, letting him know the financial wall was impenetrable. The house is sold. I am secure. That part of my life is over. If you want to rebuild a relationship with me, it has to be on my terms, with no financial expectation ever. And for now, those terms are that you spend a lot more time proving your maturity and a lot less time talking to me about your problems. I understand, Mom. I really do. Thank you for listening. His voice sounded relieved, as if a small weight had been lifted merely by speaking the truth. Goodbye, Brandon. I wish you well. Work hard. I hung up the phone and walked back to my easel. The curiosity was satisfied, but the resolution remained. Over the next few years, I thrived. I traveled extensively with Eleanor, painting the vibrant landscapes of Tuscany and the ancient ruins of Greece. I devoted my time to the Art Scholarship Fund, mentoring young artists who showed the kind of passionate dedication Brandon never did. I met a charming, kind man named Arthur, a retired history professor who treated me with respect, intelligence, and genuine affection, completely unconcerned with my financial status. He became my companion, my equal, and my partner in exploring the world. My life wasn't just better than it had been, it was completely and gloriously different. I had swapped the role of silent victim and abused provider for the title of adventurer, philanthropist, and artist. My hair was silver, my skin was wrinkled, and my heart carried the scars of betrayal, but my spirit was lighter and younger than it had been in decades. I occasionally received letters from Brandon, no phone calls, only letters. They were not appeals for money, they were updates on his life. He was working his way through college at night, studying to be a mechanical engineer. He and Tiffany had divorced, she had moved away. He was slowly, painfully rebuilding his life through honest work and self-sufficiency. I never replied, but I kept the letters. They were documentation, not of financial transactions, but of his journey to independence. They were proof that sometimes the hardest, most devastating lessons are the ones that finally lead to growth. My final act of revenge wasn't the lawsuit, the sold house, or the excluded will. My final act of revenge was living a long, happy, vibrant life that they couldn't be a part of and couldn't financially benefit from. I had taken back my life, my money, and my dignity. My name is Brenda Richter. I am 75 years old. I am loved, respected, and completely secure. I have learned that freedom is the only price worth paying for true happiness. And the most special person in my life is finally me.